11/22/63 is a huge book. It's about a man named Jake who uses a time portal to go back in time to try to stop the assassination of President Kennedy. Okay, let me start by saying, even though this book refers to historical events, it's ultimately a fictional story. You do not need to be familiar with U.S. history or President Kennedy in order to enjoy it. I actually enjoyed this book very much, and I don't really know much about the historical events myself. Whenever King would describe something in the past, I'd follow along with Wikipedia kind of for my own pleasure, but I don't think you need to do that in order to follow along yourself. So this time-traveling portal, every time you use it, it takes you back to the same exact time in 1958. And no matter how much time you spend back there, whenever you come back, it's only been 3 minutes. And this time-traveling portal happens to be in a local burger joint. The owner of the restaurant, Al, discovered the portal, and he normally uses it to go back in time to buy food at 1958 prices so he can sell them for cheaper today. I know, it's a really stupid use of time travel. And I think Al realized that too, because the most recent time he used it, he stayed in the past for several years and he tried to stop the Kennedy assassination himself. But he ended up getting terminal cancer. He had to abort his mission and come back home before he could finish. And this is where Jake comes in. Al tells Jake everything about the portal and his plans. He gives him a notebook full of useful information about important locations and dates and the whereabouts of Lee Harvey Oswald and other people who may or may not have been involved with the assassination. He even includes a sports almanac so he can make money.
Money! I can't lose. Money! Up here!
So after careful consideration, Jack agrees to the mission and he goes back to 1958 where he lives for 5 years. He goes to Texas and he gets a place in a small town outside of Dallas and he just lives his life. He becomes an English teacher at a local high school. He meets new friends. He even starts dating Sadie, who is the school librarian. He also takes up teaching in the drama department where he puts on a few school plays. I mean, he really just lives out his life. This is where I've heard most of the criticism about the book. It really just dives into his day-to-day, and a lot of people find this boring. But I didn't find it to be a problem at all. I actually really liked the life that he built. And just in case you didn't like his life, he never lost focus on his main mission. In every single chapter, King made it a point to have Jake kind of check up on his mission. You know, the chapter might mostly be about him hanging out with Sadie, or chaperoning a school dance, or writing a play. But at some point, he'll eventually review his notes, or take a trip to Dallas to do some investigation, all the while trying to hide his mission from Sadie and his friends. Which makes even like the more normal situations end up having a lot higher stakes, because if they find out or get involved, it can get dangerous for them. And this format of going back and forth between Jake's two lives, it goes through the end of the book. In that way, this book does a great job at keeping everything balanced. It's such a long story, and all the subplots inside don't really get lost at any point. And like every King novel, the people are written so well. Jake's fall for Sadie is really slow and organic. And the 1950s era was written really well. King did such a great job at reminding you throughout the book that you're in the past without necessarily telling you you're in the past. Casual references to prices or seeing the milkman. Even policies like the red tape of laws weren't really dialed in very well back in the 50s. And there's a lot that Jake gets away with that he could never have today. There's a really interesting idea in the book that the past doesn't want to change. And the bigger the event you want to change, the more fate fights back. At times, it really feels like a Final Destination movie, and it really pumps up the pacing throughout the book. You know, fate tries to stop you any way it can. You'll get a flat tire, miss a bus, or maybe you inadvertently get involved with the mob, and they track you down, beat you up, take your money, ransack your house. Just an example. I even picked up on a really interesting message about like the well-being of women and protecting them. There are 3 main missions that Jake sets out to do when he goes back in time. And all 3 of them involve saving women in some way. First, he saves a woman from an abusive husband. Then he saves a woman from being accidentally shot. Along the way, he falls in love with Sadie, who just so happens to have just gotten out of an abusive relationship herself. So it wasn't surprising to discover that Lee Harvey Oswald was also an abusive husband. So his main mission kind of evolves from just saving Kennedy to now saving another woman. And one last thing I wanted to share about the book before I go into the bad. This is kind of like an in-between. The ending is mostly good. Throughout the book, Jake goes back and forth between like 3 options. He could save Kennedy, then just live out the rest of his life in the past and never leave. He could save Kennedy, then return home and never come back. Or he can return to the present, use the portal again to go back to 1958 and undo everything he did. I won't tell you what he picked, but I will say that I absolutely love what he picked. I just didn't like how he came to his conclusion. I thought it was real messy, and it created like a really confusing offshoot of an alternate reality that I just wasn't buying. Okay, now I'm going to go on to what was a bummer about the book. Kennedy is hardly in this book. His name is mentioned a lot, and you get to hear what other people think about him. But like Jake never goes to any rallies, or he never meets him. He really doesn't do much research into Kennedy at all. He just spends most of his time investigating Lee Harvey Oswald, which I guess is to be expected, but I would have liked a little more from Kennedy. Like, for instance, there's a point at the end where you get to listen in on one of Kennedy's phone calls. I really like that moment, and I wish there was more like that along the way. The trip to Derry. When Jake first uses the portal, he does a little side mission that takes him to a place in Derry. And at first I was like, that's cool. I know Derry. But there was like at least a full chapter devoted to rehashing the lore from It. We even meet Beverly and Richie, and they tell Jake about a killer clown and how kids go missing, but the adults just act like nothing's wrong. You know, this is like a time travel-y fantasy book, but it never feels that way because it's otherwise grounded in so much reality. So the time in Derry felt really out of place. And unfortunately, the rehashing happened right when he got to Derry. So the whole time he was there, I just kept thinking about Pennywise. He even refers back to Derry several times in Dallas. You know, whenever he meets people who are mean-spirited or just oblivious to things that seem evil, he compares them to people back in Derry, which really made me question their motives. Are they just lousy people, or are they being influenced by some creature 2,000 miles away? Anyway, don't let the bad comments keep you from reading this book. It's a fantastic read. It's damn near 1,000 pages, but it never felt that way to me. There's always something going on that kept me interested, which is amazing because this is such a long book. This isn't a typical Stephen King horror book, but there are several moments that are very vicious and gruesome. So if you're a squeamish reader, this won't be for you. Thanks for watching. My name's Kenny. I'm normally here every week to talk about movies. If that seems like something that interests you, check out my channel and watch some of my other videos. And until next time, thanks for letting me share.